Back to our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Anna Kovalova. Anna is one of the leading specialists, one of the leading lights of pre-revolutionary Russian cinema and early Soviet film culture as well. She is co-author, along with Yuri Tsivian, of two monographs published consecutively in 2011 and 2012. The first was entitled Kinematografiia from 1896-1917, and the second one was called Kinematografiia Kinопроизводство и фильмография, both of which are enormously important works for anybody who wants to know anything about pre-revolutionary Russian cinema. She has published very widely in Russian and also very widely in English. She has published scholarly articles in journals such as Film History, Slavonic and East European Review, Russian Review, and more than 2 articles in studies in Russian and Soviet cinema, the most recent of which entitled The Picture of Dorian Gray, painted by Mayor Holt, which appeared in issue number 1 of volume 13, 2019, is a hugely important article about one of the most famous lost films in the history of Russian and Soviet cinema. She's also been involved in a research project which has established the most complete electronic database of early Russian narrative film texts. This is part of a group or research project entitled Early Russian Film Prose. She was also one of the co-organizers of a very important conference dedicated to the film historian Benjamin Vishnevsky, which took place in Moscow in June 2019. And the proceedings from that conference, we hope, are going to be published in Russian at some state in the future. Dr. Kovalova's, the title of her talk this evening is Women of Tomorrow, ? Female Professionals in Pre-Revolutionary Russia. We're delighted that you're here with us. Anna, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Cavendish and Dr. Molly for inviting me to the seminar. And of course, it's a great honor for me to talk to you all today. And I'm happy to be in London, even virtually. Of course, I would like to thank from all my heart everyone who has joined us today, all the friends and colleagues, and all the listeners of the paper I'm going to present. I'm going to share my screen and talk about women of tomorrow, female film professionals in pre-revolutionary Russian cinema. So at first, I would like to give a small introduction to the topic. Then I would like to point to 2 main questions that I'm going to focus on today. And then we're going to speak about different film professions and how women were involved in these very different professions. And I will try to focus on Elizaveta Thiemann, who was the first female film director in Russia, as it had been promised already. And then we'll return to these 2 questions and discuss the title, which might be a bit puzzling because there is a question mark. Were they women of tomorrow or not? Here you can see the gallery of first and the most important film professionals that was published in Kinematografiia dorevoliutsionnoi Rossii, that is Cinema of Pre-Revolutionary Russia, by Semen Ginzburg. This book is a classical one. It is a bit old, but it has been republished recently, and students in many institutes still study early Russian cinema using this book, so it is still actual. And as you can see, we can only have portraits of men here. And actually, the professions are also limited. Here we have mostly directors, set designers, cameramen, and there is also a pioneer of Russian cinema who was a demonstrator, actually. So no women at all. The situation is a bit different, and the approach is a bit more diverse. In the reference book, desk reference book, All the Cinematography, published in 1916. So the diversity lies within the professions, because here we have people of different professions. For example, we have the owner of the Motion Picture Theatre Olympia, we have a managing director, we have an owner of one of the studios, we can call him a film producer, I think. And also we have some women here in this gallery. There are 5 women, but all of them are actresses, except of Vera Corelli used to write scripts also. But today we are not going to speak about actresses, actually, because the focus is borrowed from this fascinating project, which I think you all know, Women Film Pioneers project, that focuses on the women who worked behind the scenes during the silent film era. So not actresses, but all the other professions, which are directors, producers, screenwriters, editors, and more. And more is the key word here. So a lot of professions in which women were involved. And actually, I think it's our fault that we don't have many profiles of Russian female film pioneers on that website, and we're going to fix that. But still, there were a lot of women. And so let us try to focus on these questions. So women didn't contribute enough to behind the scenes early Russian cinema. We can see this argument like in many books on early Russian cinema. And so the other statement which we are going to check and question is if they did, their work in cinema started due to World War I. So several, like many articles published in the 1910s, we see this point, something like, and we'll see these articles later on. So many men just went to war, and that is why we had to hire women. So that's why women start to work as screenwriters, they start to direct films, and that is logical, and to some extent it is correct. But let us try to check that. Let us try and see if women were involved in some professions even before 1914, even before when many men just went to fight at the World War I. So what we might start with this satirical encyclopedia, which was published in the journal Projektor. And here we have, in this encyclopedia, we have different terms related to cinema, and some of the terms refer to professions. And so we have a list of professions, and you know that in Russian, the nouns are not gender neutral. Russian is like German in this case. So we have nouns masculine, feminine, and neuter. And so most of the professions, they are masculine here, and they refer to like male professionals, even actor, not actress, but actor. Actor, pianist, decorator, film producer. And we have only one female profession, and that is a wardrobe mistress, or kostyumersha, as we put it in Russian. So that's what we have from this encyclopedia, which was a bit of a joke, and what was in reality. So of course we are not going to speak about all the professions, but like let us take a look at some schemes. So this is a film studio, and so and the professions that are connected with making films and creating films and shooting films. So a director, an editor, a camera operator, a set designer, a screenwriter, a producer, and an assistant. It's a very important profession and widely discussed in the 1910s. And of course, we also have a motion picture theater and people which were involved in this industry. Not all of them, but a theater owner, a ticket taker, a pianist, a projectionist. And that is not all, because also we had a trade press and people who were involved in this, journalists, film journalists and critics. Let us discuss some of these professions, and I'm going to highlight those in which women were involved in white, and not white, but yellow, sorry. And so if we see that they were involved even before 1914, then we will also underline those professions. So I think it is a good idea to start with a director, and luckily, thanks to our colleague Natalie Rabchikova, there is a profile of one of female film directors, Russian film directors, Olga Bisphalliver, in the WFPP website, and you can see the dates. And also there were other female film directors, Antonina Kajonkova and Olga Preobrazhenskaya, and all of them started directing films after 1914. So actually we can highlight the profession of a director with yellow, but and we also might be interested in the fact that in 1918 more women were about to join this profession, because in Kinogazeta we can see reports about actresses Olga Gzovskaya and Vera Karali, who were about to become directors also. But and also it is important to know that this involvement, the female involvement in the film directing profession, was reported in many ways. Not only Kinogazeta and other film issues were discussing the fact that women start to direct films, but also we can see those on film posters. So the poster for the episode of Love, or Love episode, it underlines that Olga Bisphalliver had written the script and also had been a director. You can see this here above. So we can have it yellow now, but are we going to underline this? Were any female film directors before 1914, before the war started and many men went to fight? So yes, we have this case, and it is a rare case for this period, this earliest period of Russian cinema, but it is a very important one. I think that many of you already know this film, The Departure of a Great Old Man. It is a film about Leo Tolstoy, and so there were two directors, Yakov Partizanov and Elizaveta Thiemann, and she also played one of the roles in this film. She played Tolstoy's daughter, Alexandra. So why do we think that this film was important? Let's take a look at the article in one of the leading journals, Cinefono. Oh, you see this female projectionist, yeah, on this picture. And so Samuel Luria, the chief editor of this most important Russian trade journal, wrote about this film. In this picture, you will find neither trendy tricks nor a plot that would affect your nerves. The simplicity of the plot itself, of the acting, and everything revealed on the screen is where the world tragedy lies. That is what causes silent but scalding tears. That is what fills the viewer's soul with something hard but also meek and clear. Aside from the plot, this film is marked by detailed staging and profound, vivid performance. But of course, if we have this significant film, and this significance was recognized not only by film scholars but also by critics in the 1910s, as we can see, because even in 1918 the critics continued to discuss the film in Kinogazeta. And so it is logical to assume that in some way the credit for this film would be given to Protazanov only, and so that Elizaveta Thiemann would be a bit neglected in the discussion of this film and ignored. And actually that is what happened. You can see this a screenshot from a rather recent TV documentary, The Departure of a Great Old Man, Myths and Versions. So it was released like several years ago by the major TV channel, Russian TV channel, The Culture. And you can see that this in this film, only Protazanov is mentioned as a director of this film. And a very similar approach can be found in scholarly works. For example, in this book by Mikhail Erlazarov, the author points that Elizaveta Thiemann was assisting Protazanov, and he doesn't draw any evidence. He doesn't prove it with any evidence. Why did he think that he was assisting rather than directing together with Protazanov? And so, but if we refer to the trade press, we can see that it probably was something the opposite. Let us look at Cinefono again. Cinefono 1912. You can see two portraits. And the portrait of Elizaveta Thiemann is published right near the portrait of Yakov Protazanov, who later became one of the most prominent film directors of Russian and Soviet cinema, a true classic of Russian cinema. And what Samuel Luria, the chief editor of Cinefono, writes, we cannot help expressing our amazement and admiration for Mrs. Thiemann and Mr. Protazanov, who directed the film. So he underlines that there were two directors. One should have enormous love and self-hearted devotion to cinema to direct a film in the way they did. Hats off to them. So, yep, but the film hasn't been released. There were some reasons for that, and according to Veniamin Vishnevsky's filmography, it was the only film that had been directed by Elizaveta Thiemann. But did she take part in creating other films? I think it's obvious that she did. So we can see, let's take a look at this photo that was published in Kinogazeta. So the film crew of the Japanese Woman's Love. Here we see Protazanov, we can see Paul Thiemann, and we can see Elizaveta Thiemann, who is right in the center of the picture. So she was present during shooting. We don't know exactly what she was doing, but it is clear that she was present and she contributed somehow. It can be also useful to address to Memoirs by Vladimir Garzin, which was another prominent Russian film director. He wrote, Elizaveta Thiemann took part in directing films, not film, not only The Departure of the Great Old Man, but films in the plural. And what is known for sure is that she was very active as a producer and as a co-producer. She was the wife of Paul Thiemann, one of the major film producers in revolutionary Russia, and she used to run the studio with him even before Thiemann was interned, even before Thiemann had to leave Moscow during some repressions against the Germans that began after the World War started. So even before 1914, she used to be something like a co-producer, though we don't know if she was an official co-producer. There are very detailed memoirs by the cameraman Alexander Levitsky about the creation of this famous film picture of Dorian Gray, and he writes in many about Elizaveta Thiemann's involvement in this enterprise, that she used to work with him and with Merhold and discuss many details connected with the film. So starting with the script and casting and ending with discussing some of the episodes. The case of Elizaveta Thiemann wasn't unique. We also know about Antonina Kajonkova, who was the wife of another Russian film producer, Alexander Kajonkov, and she also used to be a head of the companies. Some memoirists mentioned that actually she was the head and not Alexander Kajonkov, but we don't know. But we know that she could represent this company officially. For example, she published in Cinefonor as a board member of a joint stock company, Alexander Kajonkov and Co. So she was like sometimes she used to be a face of the company. And so what do we know about Elizaveta Thiemann, this important woman, a film producer and the first female director in Russia? So that's a bit sad that for a long time we didn't even know the key dates, like date of her birth and date of her death, because we thought we didn't know anything about her birth, and her date of death used to be pointed out as 1926, and that's the date that Viktor Korotkий has in his fundamental reference book of early Russian film directors and cameramen. So why 1926? There was a report in one of the emigre journals about the death of Lydia Mikowitz, and so about a woman who contributed to the Russian cinema, and the last name of Elizaveta was Mikowitz, and that is why the scholar Rashitin Girov thought that there was a mistake in this journal, and so it was Elizaveta who died in 1926. So he put this date as the date of her death. but later on, he understood that probably it was Lydia, but not Elizaveta, and that it was Elizaveta's sister, because she had a sister whose name was Lydia Mikowitz. But now we can see that there was no mistake, and neither Lydia nor Elizaveta died in 1926. But in 1926 died Lydia Mikowitz, that was the mother of Elizaveta and Lydia. And so the trick is that this Lydia Mikowitz also took part in Russian cinema. Like maybe 5 days ago, a colleague of mine, Arina Raniva, has found out a document that proves that Lydia Mikowitz, Elizaveta's mother, also worked in this Thiemann film studio. And so maybe it is another woman of whom we should speak today or later on, and add another profile to WFPP. So now we can see what about the truth about this 1926, but what about the true date of Elizaveta's death? So actually this is not correct. This is the death of Lydia Mikowitz, her mother. So we don't know exactly about the date of her birth, because there are different versions. And unfortunately, we still don't know when exactly she died, but we know that it was in 1970s. So she lived that long. And you can see her photo of 1950. That is the first Russian film director, one of her immigrant photos, because she immigrated, obviously. And so all this was known thanks to Janet Thiemann, who was her daughter-in-law, and she now lives in the US, and she has a family archive with some photographs, and I had access to these photos thanks to Peter Bagrov, with whom we were doing this research on the emigre life of Elizaveta Thiemann. That was a very interesting story that Jeanette told us, and but the most fascinating detail for me was the picture of the departure of the great old man, of this film that she directed in 1912. Actually, it was the only document that was somehow related to Elizaveta's cinema life. And Janet told us that in the family, they thought that it was something like a joke, a photo from some amateur shooting. So they didn't even know that she was involved in cinema professionally, and that she contributed so much to Russian cinema, and maybe to world cinema as well. And so when we told the story, the whole story, then Jeanette wrote to us. Now I understand her better now. So now we can actually highlight two professions, a director and a producer, and we can also underline them, because we know that at least Elizaveta Thiemann was a director and a producer even before 1914. And so there is another profession in the middle, an assistant. So when did women begin to work as assistants? So yeah, I was going to highlight this profession also early, because well, it's in many memoirs and in many sources of many memoirs and of many sources, we know that women have been working as editors from the very start. So let's discuss assistants, because that is a bit more complicated. From the first side, we can think that it's easy, because we have this photo published in 1917 in theater newspaper that states that Zinedisport was the first female assistant director in cinema. It's interesting that her portrait was published, and that the editor, who was Witold Akramovich, a significant figure for early Russian film, by the way, that he decided to pay attention to this and to this profession. We know that Zinedisport was an actress. You can see some of her photos that are published in this fascinating website. A friend and colleague of ours is making it. His name is Leonid Mileyev. If you want to, you can go to this website and see very rare, unique pictures connected to early Russian cinema. So she was reported to be the first director's assistant in early Russian cinema, but actually that might not be true. I think that we can be sure, more or less sure, that there had been assistants even before. We can turn to this very useful for this topic article, which is called "A Woman in Cinema," which was published not in the trade press, but in Journal для женщин. That means Journal for Women. And I want to thank my former student and colleague Anna Andreeva, who actually found the article and shared it with me, because it's precious for this topic. And so the author, Vsevolod Tchaikovsky, points out, now when there is such a lack of men, our assistant directors are mostly women. They do no worse than men. On the contrary, when it is necessary to furnish the setting, to arrange a cozy corner, a woman shows much more taste and originality than a man. They work with purely feminine accuracy, and they do not lose sight of any detail. The business only benefits due to that. Assistant directors make 150 to 200 rubles. That's a lot, actually. But if an assistant has enough energy, artistic taste, and imagination, she can find her way to become a director. So here we have a very responsible job this job, according to Tchaikovsky, could lead an assistant to directing films. I think that's important. And we can highlight this profession, but I'm not going to underline that, because I haven't found any evidence that there were female assistants before 1914. I think we should leave it that way. And so here, now we have to turn to screenwriting and some very important things about women's screenwriting in Russia has already been discussed by Anna Andreeva, whom I have already mentioned. She has recently published a profile for Anna Mar, who had been the most significant female screenwriter in the 1910s. I think there is no doubt of that. And also Anna Andreeva has some statistics. Approximately 7% of feature film production in Imperial Russia was written by 37 different female authors. So this problem of female screenwriting was I cannot say that it was discussed rather widely, but it was discussed. And there was an article on women screenwriting published in the Journal of Kinematography in 1915. And also there were some, and it was a serious article, but also there were some not so flattering remarks on women writing scripts. Let's take a look at this one. Women who write do not have a taste for inventing an original plot, and quite often they deliberately and carefully turn the entire novel they have just read into a screenplay. Sometimes female writers do have original themes, but very rarely. Original works are usually reduced to the depiction of the author's biography, a true story. So, yeah, but you can see that the screenplays by Anna Mar was widely advertised, and actually she wasn't the only female screenwriter who had been advertised specifically. You can see this star with a portrait of Olga Bisphalliver, another very productive female screenwriter. But all this covers the post-war period. So Anna Mar and Bisphalliver started to write scripts after 1914, but were there any significant female screenwriters who used to write before the war? Actually, there were. Sorry. Yep. And as an example, we can take Maria Kalisz, who was a writer, a philosopher, and a journalist. Her letters to Olga Kniper-Chekhova, some of the fragments of these letters had been published by Yurin Sivin in the Veliki Kinemo catalog, which is the greatest reference book on early Russian cinema. And she also wrote scripts. We know about 3 scripts, that 3 films by Kalisz, but maybe there were more. So for at least 3 scripts, and 2 of them were shot before the war. And what is also interesting, I think, is that she also used to publish articles under pseudonym in Kajonkov's journal Vestnik Kinematografiia, Herald of Cinematography. There are no less than 7 articles written by her, and I think that that really makes her a cinema journalist. And since she, in her letters to Kniper-Chekhova, she was trying to persuade Kniper-Chekhova to play for Kajonkov, and she used to write scripts for Kajonkov, and she used to publish articles in Kajonkov's journal. Kajonkov is a famous film producer, as it had been already mentioned. I think that maybe she used to be something like an official member of staff, but we don't have documents that would prove that. So I cannot say that this for sure, but I hope that I can highlight those professions, a screenwriter and a journalist, and not only highlight, but also underline them, because Maria Kalisz used to write scripts and articles on cinema even before 1914. So now we should turn to this side, which is, it's going to be brief. because unfortunately I do not have much time left. But we should speak a bit about motion picture theaters as well. And unfortunately, I cannot speak in much detail, but I think you can guess, or you can believe me, that in these professions, theater owner, a ticket taker, and a pianist, in these professions, women were involved very much from the very start. There were, for example, in St. Petersburg, there were many famous female theater owners, such as Fyodorova Vassilieva, who used to work with the first Russian film producer, Alexander Drankov. And I hope that my colleague Irina Raneva will write a profile for her someday. And one of the evidence for pianists, you can see this caricature published in 1913, before the war. Unfortunately, the majority of them are men, but we still this woman in the center. So there were a lot of female pianists in the Russian motion picture theaters. Of course, the most difficult profession is a projectionist. And though we had seen, you remember this woman projecting on the Cinefono logo, and we can find another projectionists women on the advertisements and on caricatures, but did they really act as projectionists in the pre-revolutionary Russia? Actually, they did. You can see this report, this small article in Cinefono. Lack of hands has caused a new phenomenon in the life of motion picture theaters, female projectionists. As time goes by, women will undoubtedly take hold in this field of cinema where accuracy and carefulness are most needed. These qualities are more typical of men, of women. And that's true, actually, because after the revolution, there were a lot of female projectionists in the Soviet Union. But this is the case when we can we can only highlight this profession, and we cannot say that there were a lot of female projectionists before the war. It was the case when the war helped women to join a profession. And so now we have these two last professions, a camera operator and set designer. And it would be logical to assume that women were more likely to become set designers than camera operators. But and that was very surprising for me, that actually it was vice versa. And I don't know anything about women as set designers, but we have some information about women as camera operators. So we can turn to this article again. The work of a camera woman, that is a photographer who shoots a film, is no less interesting and independent. Now we have many female camera operators. At first, they work at laboratories, then they learn to become camera operators. So Tchaikovsky speaks of many female camera operators, but in our filmographies, we have none. And I think it's clear that it is very sad and puzzling. So what are we going to do about this? There were a lot of female camera operators, but we don't know anything about any single woman. And so that turns out us to those methodological problems that we face if we want to investigate this this theme about women being involved in early Russian cinema. So how do we find information about these women? That is very complicated, because in the trade press, which is our principal source, we can find mentionings about these women very rarely, even about Elizaveta Thiemann. For example, I was very happy when I found this note. This note is about the party that was given by Gash, who was who had been a representative of um, Pate in Russia. So he was going to give a huge party for all major filmmakers in Moscow. And so there is a report on this party, and so who was present. And so this producer and Paul Thiemann with his wife. So she is there, but she is put only as his wife, and we cannot know whether Gash invited her only as her wife, but also as a woman who used to work for the company, maybe no less than her husband did. So you can see this photo of the first Congress of Film Professionals in Russia, which was organized in 1911. And we can see some women here. I was very happy to see those women. And later on, I have found the list of the participants, and that made me very happy, because I thought that, okay, now I know at least about 1911 which women were active as film professionals. Maybe I'll find something of them, but it was tricky, because for example, Grigory Lipkin, which was one of the major provincial film producers in Russia, he used to work in Yaroslavl, is mentioned in the list. And also we can see in the list, we can see two women with the last name Lipkin. And I thought, oh, great. Probably those Lipkin women were something like Elizaveta Thiemann or Antonina Kajonkova. And now we can have another female co-producer or something like that. But when I consulted my colleague, Irina Zubatenko, who is a great specialist in early Russian cinema, and she specializes in cinema in Yaroslavl. And she told me that, well, probably the Lipkin's wife had nothing to do with cinema, and the other Lipkin woman who was mentioned in the list was his daughter, who was to be 11 by that moment. So obviously they were just guests on the Congress. So we can have this a chain of research that will just lead us to nowhere. So since we don't have enough evidence in the trade press, it is really hard to investigate them. And so now we are back to our title, Women of Tomorrow, with a question mark. Probably you know that this is the title of one of the most famous early Russian films, A Woman of Tomorrow, written by Alexander Voznesensky, which is about a very progressive women doctor. So were they women of tomorrow? They managed to join one of the most fascinating fields and new fields, cinema, and to do something in those new professions. But sadly, most of them didn't become women of tomorrow, because there were no tomorrow for them. And very few of these women continued to work in the Soviet cinema. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was really fantastic, wonderful, and absolutely very, very interesting. I'm just looking in the chat for specific questions as opposed to comments, but I don't see any sort of questions. You can all presumably access the chat. On women as filmmakers was preoccupied film production with various, and many were probably more influential than their directors. It's also a question of where to look for evidence, not only in mainstream trade publications, but for instance in journalism aimed at women, as Dick Abel's recent work on women's role in early American cinema has shown. Now, I have a question following on from that from Ian, which is, Anna, are you suggesting that there were new barriers to women working in film after the revolution? In other words, when you say that they're not women of tomorrow, you mean that the October Revolution prevented those particular women from continuing their work in the film industry? But I suppose the question would be related to another generation, or the women who stayed behind or remained in Russia, and what their prospects were within the early Soviet film industry. Perhaps you could comment on that a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. Of course, it is hard to know what would have happened, but not that the October Revolution constructed some barriers for them, but we can see that the logic of the pre-revolutionary cinema was to involve more women. For example, you remember those notes in Kinematografiia cinema newspaper about Olga Bisphalliver, a famous Russian actress, is to become a director. So she's going to her estate to prepare herself and to do some research. And knowing Bisphalliver, we can be sure that she was very serious about it. But there was a tendency of involving these women. But as the cinema, this tradition of Russian cinema, it was breaking down. So the Soviet cinema didn't take up this tendency. So and we do not know about this supposed debuts. Would they actually? They didn't happen. And if not for the revolution, probably they would happen. So that's the case. But of course, we can say that there were no women in Soviet cinema, and quite the opposite. It was more democratic in this way.
Yeah, sorry, I meant, I probably should have clarified that the type of cinema that they were involved in making was to some extent no longer, well, I suppose it was in terms of the continuity of the mainstream and popular cinema into the 1920s. There are some other questions in the chat. A question from Joan Titus. You said that you had some visual evidence of women musicians. Did you come across any names listed anywhere in any press? So women as pianists, illustrators, orchestral musicians, or orchestral directors?
Yes. If you just review those trade journals, you can come across some names. For example, I think the most famous woman was Olga Bisphalliver, and it was in the early 1910s. She was a very young girl, actually. I think she was 16 when she died during performing, because she died of an exhaustion, because many, they were very poorly paid, and she was playing for 12 hours. And obviously she was weak, and it was a great scandal in St. Petersburg when that happened, like just during the film screening. And after that, there was a tendency to check upon motion picture theaters, and journalists were involved, and some reports about how pianists are treated appeared, and we can find some names. Also, we have another source which is not so accurate, because those are official reports. But another source is what we are now collecting with Yuri Tsivian and Roman Timenchik. Some not only articles, but also fiction stories about different people involved in cinema. And there are a lot of stories, short stories about female pianists. So one of them was written by a relatively famous writer called Shulgovsky. And so the protagonist is also a female illustrator in a motion picture theater.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Julia Sutton-Mattocks. Thank you for a fascinating talk. For any women who carried on in the Soviet era, were there any particular genres of films they made? My only knowledge of them is Rachmanova and Inkizhinov's Rasplata, which I suppose fits into the very broad and stretchy health film category.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think here we have a rather predictable situation, and I just don't know why we don't have similar pattern in early Russian cinema. That so female film directors were very much likely to specialize in children's films. One of the most famous and fascinating film directors is Margarita Barska, who used to be forgotten, but now, thanks to a number of scholars and in Natalia Miloserdova in the first place, she has returned to the Russian and Soviet film canon, and she's a true classic of Russian cinema with her Torn Shoes, the film highly praised by Maxim Gorky, for example.
There is a question. Ian has remarked about Preobrazhenskaya Olga being one obvious exception, perhaps to a previous comment. I mean, her first film in the 20s is what, Kashtanki, is it, or is she making films before that?
Well, you know, I don't remember her filmography. I'm afraid of making a mistake. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think we're asking out of curiosity. I mean, we know she makes Babia Brzezinskaya, but she does make films before that. I seem to remember, but it's sort of not in the early sort of agitprop or straightforwardly agitprop period. I have a question from Ben Keatley. Is there any evidence of the influence of these women, the pre-revolutionary generation of women, had on post-revolutionary female filmmakers in Russia? I don't know whether you've partly answered that question or not, but it is worth asking about, I suppose, the younger generation coming through at any stage, and whether they were familiar with the pre-revolutionary work of some of these women, both as directors and as screenplay writers.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Thank you so much for asking it. I think that it is very tricky with directors, because this film, like The Departure of the Great Old Man, directed by Protazanov and Elizaveta Thiemann, it was widely discussed, but very few people actually watched it because it hadn't been released officially due to objections from the Tolstoy family. And the films that were directed by different women, I'm not sure that they were particularly influential. But if we speak about screenwriting, maybe here we can have more films and more names, and the influence might be stronger because, for example, there was a rather significant book by Korolevich, Женщины в кино, Women in Film, published in the 20s in the Soviet Union. And he mentions Anna Mar as one of the most influential screenwriters. And I think that here we can have much influence, more influence than with directing, because female film directing was still a bit new for the late 1910s, whereas screenwriting had a longer tradition.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. There's a question from Natasha Dubek-Meyer about the terms montajor and montajnica and when that becomes established as an alternative, as a possibility, and when it emerged. If we have in mind, and I'm reading from Natasha's post, that most editors were women.
Yep, that is a very important question, and I can answer it thanks to Anna Andreeva, and who turns me to this fascinating article, "Женщины в кинематографии, Women in Cinema," that I used to quote, because Tchaikovsky has actually, he has three professions for editor or montajnica. He has skleyщица, монтировщица. I don't know how to put it in English, I'm sorry. So maybe, Phil, you can help me with that. So склейщица, монтировщица и сотрудница лаборатории. And so the skleyщица is the lowest stage, and she makes less money. And so монтировщица is supposed to be more qualified, and she makes more. And the woman who works in the laboratory, she's the most qualified, and she earns as much as an assistant director. So that's quite a lot, actually. To 200 rubles a month. So they were three types, according to Tchaikovsky, there were three types of female editors. And actually, according to this article, and there are also some other sources, those professions were mostly occupied by women.
Okay, thank you. We've got various comments by some bloke calling himself Peter Bagrov. I've got no idea who he is, but he might be related to you. Very helpful information that he's giving to us. Thank you for your talk. We have a post and a question from Marina Tedesco. Could you give some statistics? For example, in 1913, we can find in Russia 3% of female directors, or is it impossible?
Mm-hmm.
Are we in a position, are you in a position yet to be able to quantify what the involvement of women, professional women, is within the film industry?
Well, it is a bit tricky because the main source for filmography is we only have one basic filmography by Veniamin Vishnevsky, and he doesn't mention everything, of course. For example, we know that Elizaveta Thiemann used to be a producer for Picture of Dorian Gray, but it is not mentioned in the filmography. So and actually she worked on many films, but either it wasn't official or for some other reason that is not mentioned in the filmography. So we know that of different memoirs, sometimes from trade press reports, but we cannot make a true statistic of that. But if we turn to your specific question about female film directors in 1913, I'm not sure about percent, but that is relatively clear, because it looks like we only have Elizaveta Thiemann as a female film director, who directed only one film, the departure of the great old man, in 1912. So in 1913, we had only one female film director who directed and co-directed with Protazanov only one film. That's the statistic. But it seems to be like a weak statistics, but the film is really important. Maybe it is one of the most important films, Russian films, before 1914.
Okay, thank you. We have a follow-up question from Julia Sutton-Mattox, and I'd just like to add something to her question as well, which is about what do we know about the backgrounds of these women? Were they nobility, middle class? What sort of education did they have? What sort of formal education did they have? It would be fascinating to know. Could I just add to that question one of my own, which is about Elizaveta Thiemann herself? Is there any evidence that, as well as being involved as actively as a director, that she was involved in the sort of artistic direction of the studio of Thiemann and Reinhardt? I'm thinking in particular about the Golden Series, which begins around about 1911 to 1912, and I wonder what because you're in touch with a surviving descendant, whether there were any papers or a personal archive or anything that Paul Thiemann himself has written, which would allow us to understand how important she was within the studio generally, not just as a director, although that's enormously important.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you so much for asking it, because I wanted to talk about it, but I thought that I might be short of time, and I'm glad that I have the chance now. So as for her the backgrounds of those women were very different. So I think that they came from very different classes. But as for her, she was a very educated woman, and she, for example, she used to translate Vladimir Korolenko, who was one of the most important Russian writers of the 19th century, and she translated him to German, and she published these translations before she came to cinema. And she also spoke French and Italian and German, and she used to translate plays, and she used to write fiction. We have some evidence on that, and the problem about her involvement in the Russian Golden Series has become one of the most important problems of my life, actually, because it is very difficult to find specific documents that would prove that she used to focus on this work and contribute a lot. But if we read the trade press very carefully, we can see that, for example, the Russian Golden Series became extremely active after Picture of Dorian Gray. Normally, we think that it was a financial failure, and they decided not to do something like that. So this a bit art house films, but actually there were a lot of plans similar to that. They were going to make Eugene Onegin, an adaptation of Alexander Pushkin. They were going to make Griboyedov. They already made a very interesting film, an adaptation of O. Henry, which was called The Strange Surprises of Love. All these films were created, were supposed to be created or were created in the close cooperation with Vladimir Yegorov, who was one of the most prominent set designers in Russian and Soviet cinema. But this plan suddenly broke up in the 1916. So like in the beginning of the summer or in May or in June, the advertisements of these fascinating films, which people were waiting for actually, they just started to disappear. And I was wondering, well, why did they disappear? But then I saw the note by Rashid Yangirov that in the late spring of 1916, Elizaveta Thiemann was also forced to leave Moscow and to follow Paul Thiemann. So Paul Thiemann was forced to leave Moscow because he was a German citizen and there were repressions on them. And she used to run the whole company with her father and her mother, actually, after that. But when she also had to leave, those magnificent plans, they were just ruined. We cannot be sure that it was because of that, without her, they couldn't make it. We don't know, but maybe that can be our hypothesis, that if they didn't make her leave Moscow, then we might have had these fascinating films, similar to Picture of Dorian Gray.
Okay, that's very interesting and wonderful. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to ask directly? I don't think there are any more questions in the chat unless I've missed anything. If not, I would just like to ask one further question, if I may, but I don't want to exhaust you. Are you happy to take one more question? My question is concerned with, first of all, how accommodating the film industry was to women and their desire to be involved in it professionally, whether you have a sense of hostility, of a degree of sexist prejudice, which sort of marginalized women in terms of the roles that they played. And secondly, I know this might be a difficult question to answer, but whether film, the world of film, reflects the same sorts of dynamics as theatre. In other words, we see men moving from the theatre to be involved in film from about 1910, 1911 onwards. Is that something about the women that we know are involved? Do they have a theatrical background that takes them into film?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, these are very difficult questions. I think that I think that the system was quite was a bit tricky, because those producers, they didn't seem to have anything against hiring women, but maybe it wasn't a good, it wasn't supposed to be a good idea to like advertise women being involved. For example, like in Teatralная газета, theater newspaper, everything that was going on in the Russian Golden Series and in the Thiemann studio was reported in great detail, because Vitolda Khramovich, who used to run the cinema department of the theater newspaper, he also used to work for Thiemann's, but he doesn't mention Elizaveta at all. Why? Maybe we couldn't like assume that he didn't like her, or that he thought that she wasn't significant or something like that. Maybe they thought that it wouldn't be a good idea to write about a woman running this company, because they would think that it wouldn't be a good publicity to emphasize on that. Maybe this, and yep. And about the theater background, yes, I think that for many of them, this background was very important, and for Elizaveta as well, because we have some letters in the Russian State Archive of Literature and Art written by her to some theater to some people from the theater. Those notes are very brief, so I just cannot say now exactly what they were discussing, but she was in contact with theater, and she used to translate plays also, not only short stories. And also there are women connected with different fields. For example, recently we have seen the only woman mentioned in this reference book, Vsia Kinematografiia, All the Cinematography, was a costume designer, almost like in Projector, this costumersha or wardrobe mistress, but not wardrobe mistress, but a real costume designer. And she used to be one of the relatively famous tailors in Moscow. So she came from this field. So from very different fields they used to come to cinema, like from those fashion houses or like tailors shops to theater and art.
Okay, thank you. There was one question in the chat which I missed. My apologies. I'm sure you'll be happy to take it by Anastasia Kostina. Thank you for your talk. Over the course of your research, have you come across any female film professionals working in non-fiction genres? Razumny Kinematograph, Kajonkova, or similar ventures?
Yeah, that is extremely interesting. But no, I haven't come across reports like that just at the time. We know that this woman that I have already mentioned, Fyodorova Vassilieva, who used to be a theater owner, and she used to work with Drankov at the very start, and she and her husband, which also was a theater owner, and he used to visit Leo Tolstoy actually with Drankov, and maybe she was involved in that. So my colleague Irina Raneva and I, we were very eager to prove that actually it was her who organized this famous Tolstoy shooting, but honestly, we haven't found evidence of that. We only have a memoir that by the actor Nikolai Orlov, that she was very significant, and it was her who organized the whole cinema venture, not her husband. But one memoir is not enough, so maybe we can find anything about her later on, but now only some guesses.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, it's 22 minutes past 7. You've answered lots of questions, lots of very interesting questions have been put in the chat. I think we've covered all of them. So it remains merely to thank you, Anna, for joining us from the States. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to have you here this evening. And I hope we'll see you again at our next events. The next event, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is a conversation we're having with John Mackay on the basis of his first volume biography of Dziga Vertov. He will be in conversation with Rachel and me, and obviously after the initial conversational discussion session will be open to the questions, which I think is on March the 25th. We're really looking forward to it. It's an extraordinary book if you haven't read it. And perhaps I would encourage as many people as possible to read it in advance. You'll certainly want to read it after the conversation. But thank you very much for everybody who's attended this evening and for the questions that you've put and the notes that you've uploaded onto chat. It's been really wonderful. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.